Hey everybody, it's Friday night and we're going to take a impromptu trip around the world here. We're going to start with my 29 miscellaneous as we always do. And as I said, this is an impromptu video, so what you see is what you get. And what you see right now is a tank that is very much in need of maintenance. At the very least, I should be in there changing the filter and topping the water off. And you can tell I need to change the filter by the way you can see the water is flowing through the middle there and not so much on the actual places where it's supposed to be. It's kind of backflowing because the filters are clogged up. You can also see the water level is very much lower than I normally keep it. So definitely ready for some maintenance. Tonight will probably be the night that I get in there and do a water change. The only thing that's really worth mentioning or talking about in this tank that's been happening is the flower you can see there trying to develop on my Anubias plant. Not long ago, I pointed out how I was really happy with the way this Anubias plant is growing and taking off. It's growing really well in here and really doing well. It's thriving in this tank. And now we've got our first flower. I think that's the first flower. I don't remember seeing another one on this plant just yet. So they never fully open, they never fully flower underwater, but they try. And they get to what you see there, which is basically already beginning to fade away and close back up. That's actually one of the reasons I wanted to shoot this video tonight, is I wanted to get a little bit of video of that before it's gone completely. So they do try to flower underwater, and there is a look at what it looks like. So if you've got an Anubias and you see that little thing sticking up, that is exactly what it is. It is what it looks like. So moving on. We got a lot to cover tonight. My gourami tank, doesn't it look fantastic? I was so sick of seeing this thing all nasty and covered in growth, and you couldn't see into the tank, and the glass was covered, the back glass, the front glass, the side glass, it was all covered. And now it's just bright and clear and beautiful. I've gotten all the nitrates, tannins out of the tank, nitrates as well. We've got it down below 5 parts per million. On the nitrates, so I'm sure it'll come back up. The stock in this tank is pretty heavy, even though it looks fairly empty. That angelfish is not exactly dainty, and then I've got that striped Raphael catfish, and I've got some loaches on the bottom. This clown loach here is not even the biggest of the loaches that's on the bottom. I've got a red tail loach that hides in the back right there. In fact, you can just see that little bit of orange. That is the tip of the red tail loach's tail. So I've got that back there. I've got those cories. I've got one lonely little neon in here. So there's quite a few fish. I tend to feed a little heavy-handed. I know that about myself, so I know that this tank's nitrates are probably going to climb back up eventually. But right now, I did such massive water changes while I was cycling through scrubbing all the grossness out of this tank that I basically did 100% water change. I drained the tank probably 75%, filled it up, drained it 50% again, and then probably did another 25% water change after that. And as a result, again, I got the nitrates down to, pale yellow. It's just enough to make it change color in the vial, but that's about it. So all I did was black out the tank for 3 days, and the results absolutely stunned me. Now, I'm sure I didn't kill it all off completely, but I genuinely don't see any that's still alive. Everywhere you look, all that gray nastiness, that's still got to get out of there, but it's dead. It's no longer living, growing blackbeard algae, just a simple 3-day blackout. And my blackout was simply just not turning the lights on. I didn't cover it with a blanket or go to any extreme measures to make sure it was, blacked out like I've heard. Some people are pretty adamant about it, like no light at all can get in there. And I didn't bother with any of that. I just unplugged the light for 3 days. The whole rest of the fish room was lit. My LED in the middle of the room, which is currently turned off, that was turned on for the entire time. And yet, even with all of that ambient light around it, you can see the results for yourself. If you don't believe me, look at a video from a week and a half ago on my gourami tank. And you'll see a tank that was absolutely overgrown with blackbeard algae. It was disgusting looking in there. And it's just beautiful now. I cannot get over it. I'm just standing there loving looking at this tank, the way it looks now. So there you go. Again, it dropped my jaw thinking a simple 3-day blackout was all it took to have this kind of a difference. Now, that's also 3 days blackout and then a lot of elbow grease. As I said, I did a lot of scrubbing and scouring and scraping and water changing. But what I was removing was dead algae. You know, I was getting the tank all pretty and clean again, but what I was removing was dead algae. You know, it was the blackout that killed it. My elbow grease was just removing it. So there you go. We're going to move on from my gourami tank. My T-bar tank here probably needs a little work. I can see some dead Java fronds in there. We need to get in there and get them cleaned out. We can see quite a bit of new growth on my monster anubias that are just growing in here. We got new growth on both sides. We got nice green stuff over here, and we are almost, if not already, starting to breach the surface. So I definitely don't want that. I might have to get in here and cut that off right there. Oh, I didn't even notice my little Siamese algae eater sitting in there hanging out. Really cool fish. Love my Siamese algae eater. Between the two of them and the pleco I have in this tank, you can see they keep the tank pretty algae free. So the only thing we've got going on in this tank is my new heater, and I can already tell you this one works properly. I can't speak for how, you know, perfectly accurate it is. It says 25 degrees right now. Is it 25.8? Is it 24.7? You know, maybe, whatever, I don't care. I'm not worried about that sense of accuracy of when I say it's working properly. But I have seen it drop to 24, and when it drops to 24, I see the little red light come on, and in a short period of time, it goes back up to 25, and a few moments later, the little red light clicks off. That's how it's supposed to work. I have seen it up at 26, and it just sits there and sits there and sits there until eventually it drops back down to 25. So we are getting at least a reasonably accurate reading of the water temperature, and we are getting the proper behavior of the way a thermostat is supposed to work. You know, when it drops down below where I've got it set at 25, the heat comes on, the little indicator light lights up, and it does its thing. The other one that I put in there was not doing that. It was just showing 25, and I think it was just showing 25 because that's where I set it, and it never left that setting cycle, and it never went into the working cycle. The heat never came on, the temperature never changed, it just sat there at 25 continuously, regardless of the fact that the tank temperature got all the way down to about 22, and yet it just sat there saying 25. So that one went back, this new one went in, and everything, again, seems to be working just fine, and that's really about all we got going on in the tank other than the various stuff I mentioned that needs to get done. Haven't actually done any of that kind of stuff yet, but we'll get to that. My native tank is freaking out as I walked up. My black ghost knifefish tank. I had to think about what this one was called for a moment. 40 gallon, 40 breeder here. Oh look, we get a rare treat of seeing both my rubber lips in the same frame. You got one to the left and one to the right. So they do a fantastic job of keeping this tank clean too. They're worth their weight in gold when it comes to cleaning algae. Just did some work in this tank yesterday. I removed some of the temple plant that was growing over here on the left. It was growing emergent, and you can already see since I've cut it, we've got new shoots developing at all the nodes there. So this should get a little bushier and a little thicker, a little denser. And one of my viewers has suggested that the reason the leaves that were submerged were starting to look all raggedy was that I had some emergent growth at the time, and as soon as the plant began getting its atmospheric CO2 and so on and so forth and all that, you know, vibrant light and everything at the surface, it immediately began focusing on that, and it just stopped worrying about the stuff that was underwater. And in a little while, it probably would have just been a stem underwater, and all the leaves would have been above the surface. And as soon as he pointed that out, and I say he, I'm assuming it was a he, I don't know. As soon as the viewer pointed it out, then it made perfect sense. That's exactly what was going on. So I got in here and I removed the part that was emergent, you know, growing above the surface. And as I just said, I cut it off right there, and already look at the new growth I'm getting. So, not sure who that was. I don't remember who exactly said that. I get a lot of comments, so I apologize for that. But if you're watching this video and you're seeing that, you were right. And because I acted on that, I'm getting some really good recurring growth and some more, branching and whatnot on my temple plant in there. So, I'm really happy about that. That's going to look nice once that starts to fill back in. Otherwise, I wiped the front glass down. I removed a bunch of scummy stuff from the surface when I got in there and did the water change. I removed some dead bits of plant here and there, so on and so forth. And then, of course, as I said, I wiped the glass down. So we've got a nice, bright, vibrant black ghost knifefish tank now. So that's all that's going on in there, really. My native tank, I don't know why everybody is freaking out so bad. They act like they've never seen me before. Nothing really going on in this tank. Not even a lot to talk about. Just kind of ticking over. I haven't done a water change in a while. You can kind of see how tan and stained and brown looking the water is. I don't know how long it's been since I've mentioned it, but a while ago, one of these LED spotlights I had down here burned out, and I had to replace that. That's about the last thing I can think of. Let's see what this is floating up there. That's a dead fish, so I guess there's something to talk about. We have a dead fish in the tank, and it looks like its face has been chewed on just a little bit, so not sure what's going on with that. I'm going to guess... No, it's floating away. I'll get in there and look at it later and see if it's been chewed on after it's dead. I'm going to guess it bashed into something. You keep hearing me talk about how everybody's freaking out. In the morning when I turn the lights on, these pieces of wood get moved around, like forcefully moved around, several inches at a time. They get shoved up into the air by these fish banging into them and darting and dashing around. I really, really try to be as gentle as I can when I come in and turn the lights on in the morning, because I'm really afraid that these, they're just going to slam into the glass at the end of the tank and kill themselves. I've had a lot of fish over the years that are skittish do that. It's not uncommon at all for fish to inadvertently injure or even kill themselves by dashing and banging into things. So keep that in mind if you've got skittish fish and then you put lots of sharp, pointy rocks and stuff in their tank. You're asking for disaster for that. And I did not think that everybody was going to be as skittish as they are after they got used to me, and yet here they are after a couple years in this tank, and they still freak out every time I walk in here. Now, once I'm in here and they're used to me, they chill out and they do what they're doing now, and I can, if I went over to start feeding them, they'd frenzy and try to bite my fingers off. But when I first walk in, they freak out, and who knows, maybe yesterday morning, maybe this morning when I turned the lights on, one of them dashed into the wrong direction and bashed its head into something. So we've got a dead minnow, and that is one of the golden shiners. That's not one of the creek chubs. So that is one of the ones I bought as bait a couple years ago. So there you go. We got a little update on the native tank after all. So moving on to my snail tank, not really anything to talk about here again. I still have not done any kind of water change or maintenance on it. You can see how thick the mulm is over there. But I was thinking yesterday as I was pulling some snails out of there how ironic it is that I've still got 2 ghost shrimp living in this tank, and they were never even really, I don't even remember why I threw them in there, but they've been in there forever. I don't even remember how long they've been in there, probably over a year now. And it's just a completely neglected tank. I just don't do water changes on it. Every now and again, when the water, gets down to here, I'll top it off with a gallon of water or something and then forget about it again. And yet, after all this, I've still got 2 ghost shrimp still living in there. So one of these days, I keep talking about pulling them out and throwing them into Butterbean's tank, but I never get around to it. I really should do it because they eat my snail eggs, and they actually prevent me from breeding snails as fast as I'd like to. So, one of these days we'll get in there and we'll do something about the ghost shrimp, or eventually they'll die. They're ghost shrimp. They don't have that long of a lifespan. I think that the year plus that they've been in there is probably pretty long. So back to my gudgeon tank here, my purple spotted gudgeon tank. Let me mess around with these stupid little, there we go. I just have this absolutely horrible, horrible lighting on this tank, and as a result, you just can't ever see this gudgeon. He just sits up here in this one corner, and this little bit of not really properly working LED strips that I have is hardly enough to do him justice or show you what he really looks like. Nothing really to talk about with this tank either. I've still got my rubber lip pleco in there, and as far as I know, my little South American bumblebee catfish is still in there. If you kind of see what looks like a hole burrowed back there, that's because that's where that catfish lives, and presumably since it's still burrowed out, it's still in there. And then usually under here is where my rubber lip is. Every now and again I'll see it come out from underneath of this cave, but it has to hide. If it comes out, even a rubber lip pleco on the bottom of the tank will get attacked by this gudgeon. So there's not really anything else I could even put in the tank with this gudgeon. And so that's it. I've said this many times, but like, you know, I can just take a picture, and when I shoot video of this tank, I can just show the picture again and say, here's the same tank, you know. The only difference is it's a little grungier and a little, you know, dirtier. I really need to get in there and do some work on it, but I still haven't, so we're still sitting here talking about it. It's pretty, it's just boring. So there you go, make what you want of that. Moving along to my 125 that we can no longer stand directly in front of properly. Let me get over here and stand over in front of the waterfall. Excuse me. So it's grungy once again. The water's clean enough. I don't really need to worry about it in that sense. It just looks filthy and dirty because I've got all that algae growing on the glass again. So I might try doing the couple of day blackout on this tank and see what happens. This is not the same kind of algae. This is hair algae. And if you look at it, you can see how fuzzy and hairy it looks. This grows into really long, flowing, beautiful strands. It really is a pretty plant. But it's the stuff you see on ponds that grows into those big masses and mats and gets bubbles in it and just looks hideous by the end of summer. That's this hair algae. It grows prolifically when it gets lots of sunlight and nutrients. And in here, it doesn't get sunlight, but it gets plenty of light. And it's my tank, so it's getting plenty of nutrients. All of my tanks are, you know, I'm not shy with my nitrates. I'm not afraid of the nitrates in the tank. And so we get algae like this. So I really need to do something about this tank too. This is getting a little ridiculous and out of control. That looks like I've got some new leaves down here on my tiger lotus shooting out. The bulb is under this rock, so these are coming out that side. So that'll, you know, give us more of that kind of effect around that rock. This is clearly new growth from the Anubias in there. This is clearly new growth from the other species of Anubias that's in there. So, you know, this is some Java that's still growing. So we're doing okay. Everything's fine. The only thing, oh, look at this. I did just notice this too. We've got a little bit of new growth, which I'm assuming is a runner from this. I can never remember what this is called. I always want to call it Val, but I think it's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Whatever this stuff is, I think this is a shoot from that. So that's exciting. And the only problem I am running into, I need to get that tiger lotus leaf out of there. Not sure where that came from. But you see the brown and the dead in my Java Windelov. That's what you get when you're too heavy-handed with hydrogen peroxide and you get all carried away and start spraying hydrogen peroxide all over everything like it's going to be harmless and not bother anything. Hydrogen peroxide will kill your plants, people. You know, I've said it when I was using it. I didn't think I went that heavy-handed with it, but I must have really gotten in there. And I know I did, but I must have gotten in there more than I realized and really sprayed into that mass of Java fern in an attempt to fight back all of that green fuzzy algae. And you can see it fought it back to some degree. It's still on there. You know, if you look at those bits right there, you know, that's still got plenty of green fuzzy algae growing all over it. But I did fight it back a little bit. The only problem is that's at what cost? You know, and that's what I've said before. That's why I've talked about using this hydrogen peroxide for algae control. You can do it, and it does work, and there's ways you can do it that don't kill your plants, but all you got to do is be careless or make one mistake or one miscalculation, and you wind up with something that looks like that. Now, it'll grow back, You know, I didn't kill the plant. At least I hope I didn't kill the plant. I really doubt I killed all the way down to the rhizome in the middle. There's probably more than one rhizome in there anyway. But, you know, I did some damage to the plant. I certainly stressed it. It's certainly going to take time to recover. And it's all because I wanted to just fight a little bit of algae when I've got, you know, that much everywhere else. Now, also, I will say, keep in mind, look at where that's positioned, directly underneath the light. So the algae that I had growing on this was a little more significant than the stuff you see further down in the tank. But still, I could have done without doing that. I think a 3-day blackout would have been a lot more effective and a lot less disastrous than squirting it down with hydrogen peroxide the way I did. So there you go. Live and learn. I learn from my own stupid mistakes, even though I keep making them over and over again. One of these days I'll learn to keep the hydrogen peroxide out of my hands when I'm doing my water changes. But there you go. My 20-gallon angelfish tank here. There's an angelfish in there somewhere. There he is. Not a lot going on in here. I probably really ought to get in there and do a water change. It's been a little while since I've done one, but I can't even think of anything to talk about in there. I do want to get in and take that Molly or Platy or whatever that is and get that into my waterfall tank. It's really skittish fish. I don't know why. They're usually not skittish at all. But that one is, and where this tank is positioned right here, you know, on the corner when I walk in the room, it's just always freaked out, and you can see even now it's kind of hiding up against the back glass. So not good for the fish's health being all stressed out like that all the time. I never get to see it, so what's the point of having it in the tank? And so on and so forth. So that's my plan with that fish. One of these days, whenever I get around to it, I'll get in there and get that out and put it in my waterfall tank. You can see the wood in there is all nice and clean and shiny, and I've got nice smooth rocks. That is from the clown pleco that I have in this tank. Again, those small plecos, whether it's a rubber lip or a clown pleco or a bristlenose, all of those small species of plecos are absolutely worth their weight when it comes to keeping your tank nice and clean. Now, you still do have to feed them, but you supplement their food. They get some of it from the wood and the offhooks in the tank, but then you have to either feed them fresh vegetables, or in my case, I give them algae wafers, and everybody's nice and happy. My tank stays clean, and my fish stay healthy. So that's my 20-gallon angelfish tank. My little 10-gallon quarantine tank, I actually do have something to talk about this week. You see the little ripples on the water? One day I didn't notice any ripples on the water, and I thought it odd, and I meant to check to make sure the filter was still running. And then the next day when I fed the tank, I noticed that it was still, you know, still. And I thought that was odd, and I meant to check, and I remembered from yesterday that I forgot to check. And the next day, I never got around to even coming in and feeding the fish at all. Everybody got a fast day that day. And the next day when I came in, I saw that the tank looked surprisingly still, and I checked and the filter was not working. And as soon as I touched it, I heard a little bit of grit, or probably what it was a snail shell. And once I heard the snail shell grind a little bit, the things start, you know, the impeller started spinning, and then I started seeing the ripples across the water, and the water started flowing again. So for 3 days, this tank sat here with no filter running at all. And this is one of my tanks where I don't have any other circulation. I have had situations in the past where I've left filters turned off and everything was fine, and I chalked that up to the fact that I had other forms of circulation. I had power heads flowing and whatnot. This tank, I don't have any of that. And yet everybody in here was fine. I'm not surprised about the guppies. They can swim right along at the surface, you know, so no matter how much water they're in, even if it's stagnant, the guppies will be fine. But the 2 coolie loaches that are in here are also fine. They didn't seem to faze them a bit. And I did not ever really see them up near the surface of the water like they were gasping for more oxygen. So you do get steady oxygen exchange and steady gas exchange even in stagnant water. It's just that you get less and less oxygen and less gas exchange as you move further and further away from the surface. So in a really small tank that's not very deep like this, with a reasonable amount of surface area, like a 10-gallon tank, even stagnant for a few days, I still got enough gas exchange in there, and none of those plants are alive except for that mass right there. That's Marimo moss ball that's all sort of splayed out and laying flat. So that's the only source of live plant other than all the algae and everything that's growing in there. So possibly that was enough to produce oxygen to keep the tank up and running. I don't know, but we went 3 days with no filter in that tank, and everybody was just fine, including the 2 coolie loaches in there. So again, make what you want of that. So getting on to my nearly last and certainly not least tank is Butterbean's 40-gallon brackish tank here. Butterbean, of course, being my figure-8 puffer that's making an appearance now. Nothing going on in here to speak of. I just shot some video of Butterbean yesterday doing a feeding video, so you can go ahead and watch that if you want to get your fill of Butterbean. The orange sailfin mollies there, they made quite a few appearances in the video as well. Probably due for a water change. In fact, I'm sure I'm due for a water change. I don't really remember the last time I did a water change in here. I could go check my videos. I'm sure I shot a video of it when I did it, as I will again when I do the next one. But not looking too bad. I don't really feel like I need to wipe a bunch of grunge off the glass. I think I got more salt drippings down the front of the glass than I do any kind of algae growing on the inside. There's a couple little spots of cyanobacteria on the bottom that I can get out easy enough with a siphon. They'll just get sucked right out of the tank and you won't even know they were there. And then likewise, there's a few little bits of that bright red stuff on the tips of my Java fern in there. And I will point out, I always mean to mention this, but I never do. If you'll notice the Java fern, how stunted and compacted and dense it is, that's what growing in brackish water will do for it. I can grow Java fern. I am growing Java fern in this brackish water here, but look at it. It doesn't look like what you would expect Java fern to see. You can see some of those larger fronds that are probably from the original plant when I put it in here, but all of the new growth that's come out since then has been all of this very small and stunted sort of growth. So again, make what you want of that. Just a little something to point out while we're looking at the tank and I'm thinking about it. So I'm not going to talk about my waterfall tank tonight. We're going to come right back here and call it a normal round the world update. I will do a separate video probably tomorrow where I talk about the waterfall tank by itself, and I'm sure that'll be a 15 or 20 minute video in its own right. So I'm not going to try to tack that onto the end of a half-an-hour video now. It'll just get its own video. So thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. You never know what you're going to get with me. I got all kind of good stuff going on down here, and I've always got something getting videoed, and you don't want to miss any of that. So thanks again for watching. Don't forget this one here is my 29 miscellaneous tank. Thanks again. I will see you on the next one.